In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to build 5 starter houses using only materials you can find in one biome. We're going to start out with the plains biome where we'll build an oak starter house. This is going to have a foundation that's not a box. A lot of people like to build box foundations, but I want to show that it's actually not too hard to build something with a slightly more interesting foundation. I'll add a stone brick foundation and some pillars going up, and then I'll trim out the roof with some stone bricks before going to the inside with some cobblestone. Now, normally for houses like this, I would use some darker wood types for the roof, but since we're pretty limited with just the oak biome, I'm using some stone to get a darker texture. We'll come back to the roof later for a chimney, but now let's do some details on the exterior. We're going to start out by adding a little bit on the front and some windows and some flowers. Flowers are a great way to add some detail, and it's pretty simple to get them, but they add a nice splash of color. So now let's move on to the interior, where we'll add a nice floor. We've got a crosshatch pattern. We've got a chimney design using diorite, and I'll show you why in a bit, and then some survival blocks to get you going. Now, I'm also going to put an enchanting setup in here. Obviously, in the first few days, you're probably not going to be able to get an enchanting setup, but this is just underground. It's not like a main part of the house. So if you aren't able to get enchanting yet, then you can go ahead and just leave that out. I'll add some more detail using some oak pillars, and on the ceiling, I'll just make it look a bit nicer. There's not a whole lot you can do with this space. Moving back to the exterior, I'm adding a few more flowers to the front, and on the back, I'm going to work on that chimney a bit more, adding some farmland, and covering up that diorite with a barrel. We'll put up a lantern and use that chimney that we were talking about, and the reason that we did it with diorite is so we could use birch trapdoors. That's the only opaque trapdoor we can get here. And then we'll add some paintings to the interior. It's a nice way to add some more decoration, and it looks pretty nice. So that is our oak starter house. So now let's move on to the spruce. Now this one I am going to be using a box foundation for. The log cabin has such a detailed exterior anyways. It's kind of hard to do any extra stuff from there. So we're just adding a stone brick foundation once again, and some details. I'm just doing that at the beginning because I'm doing this off of a creative mode test world, but I'll try to do it in order now. We're just adding some spruce planks, and we'll get to the exterior detail that I think is pretty underutilized. Even like when I looked up log cabins, I didn't really see this, but you can actually stack up blocks and slabs to get this cool overlapping log look. And then you can add in some stripped spruce to get it even nicer, and it really sells that whole effect. Then I'm going to start adding the roof. This one also is a bit tricky to design, so now we're adding a few more exterior details in the form of some potted plants. We have ferns out here, so I'm just using those. And if you're wondering how you get the flowers in the taiga biome, you just bone meal the ground. Then I'm going to start adding the roof. This one also is a bit tricky to design, because again, our block selection is very limited. So to get a darker roof, I'm actually using logs, which, I mean, it kind of reminds me of villages now that I'm looking at it, but it does look quite good when you don't have access to dark oak. Then I'm just going to add some little window designs, and then we'll move on to the interior. But I did want to talk about the exterior details a little bit. We have the fence gates and the outward facing logs. Those help break it up a bit and add just a bit more depth. We've also got some lanterns for some light and some extra detail, and some fences for windows. Now I'm going to move on to the chimney. This one is also going to be using the campfires that we did in the last one. So we're just going to surround it with spruce since that's the only trapdoor type we can get here. And it is opaque, so it does work out. And then we'll add in some of the flower pots so that from certain angles, as long as you're not, flying over it, it looks like those little Lego brick chimneys that you see on a lot of log cabins. Moving on to the interior, we've got a nice campfire off of that chimney, and it works out really nicely just because, well, you can see it on the interior and the exterior since we have such big windows. We'll add in some barrels for some storage, and they go nicely with spruce. And then some more survival blocks, just like last time, since, well, this is a starter base, so you're probably going to be building this in survival mode. I'll knock out some more space for another underground enchanting table, and cover it up with a trapdoor. And then just some more details, including some paintings, which we can use some bigger ones. I decided to go with the lake for one of them since I think it goes really nicely with the log cabin aesthetic, and I'm also just removing some trees so we can see a little better. So now that the log cabin is complete, let's move on to the desert house. Now for this one, it's kind of stretching the rules a bit because we are using some wood, but the thing is, you're never really going to be building in the desert until you get wood, probably, because you kind of need it for a crafting table, and that's kind of an important thing in the game. So I'm just going to be assuming that you have oak wood when you get to the desert and start building in here. So we have this little design, it looks kind of like a sand castle, and we have some buttons for detail. And once again, we have a more interesting foundation. It's not just a box. We can put in our entrance, which is a lot of different types of sandstone, and a door, and I'll even put in some flooring. Flooring is one of the ways that you can easily make an interior just look 10 times better. Then I'll put in some chests for storage. Now I'll add in some more interior details, such as a bed. The cyan goes nicely, and we actually have access to green dye, so we can make it. And then once again, another underground enchanting table setup. Don't worry, we'll add in some different types of enchanting table setups in the land next too. And we'll cover it up with carpet. This isn't accessible unless you break the carpet, but it's not that hard to break the carpet, so I don't think it's a big problem. But this is one area where I actually had to change it up a bit from the original because I just didn't like it as it was. But eventually I settled on a design that looks nice and doesn't take away from the exterior, which is good. But now we'll add some texture to the outside, and since this is a sandstone house, we have plenty of different variations for blocks. And we can add some details such as windows and a stone cutter that's currently cutting a chiseled sandstone block. You do have to worry about the fact that sand will fall if it's not supported. And then we'll add in some leaves and barrels to add a bit of life to this place. It is the desert, but you know, we can still do stuff to make it look more alive since we're living here after all. But I like to mix in some stuff on the outside that is actually useful, like this wheelbarrow. It has a grindstone and this anvil out here. That way we can save some interior space since this is actually a pretty small interior, even though the house on the outside doesn't look too terribly small. The fact that this ceiling is pretty low to the ground on one of the places really messes with the interior space. But that is the desert house. So now let's move on to the mushroom house. For this one I'm going to have to clear out some trees, but this is going to be a bit interesting. I'm going to be putting this in the dark forest since you can find red mushrooms here, but it could just as easily go on a mushroom island. I didn't put it there since mushroom islands are hard to find, but you could definitely do that if you would like. Also, this is using birch, yeah, that's kind of on me. But to be fair, it's a dark forest. Those aren't usually near spawn, so you've probably done a bit of exploration to get here, and birch isn't that terribly difficult to get. So I just did some shaping for the mushroom. I added some stairs and slabs to make it look a bit more round on the base. And now we're going to move on to the cap. This is going to use a lot of red concrete and red wool, so you'll probably want to make a sheep farm. And you might not want to use as much concrete as I'm using here, but you'll probably want to have some kind of system set up because it could take a while to get this much. But concrete is actually a bit easier to come by than you might think once you start actually doing it. I'm not using concrete powder since it falls, so it's a little more difficult to work with, and I think red wool goes a bit better with the red concrete, but we also have some white mixed in here, and we can put some stripped birch logs on the outside for detail. Moving on to the interior, I'll remove the floor and replace it with stripped oak. Once again, this is something you will probably have to go and get if you do spawn in a dark forest. And then I'll put on a roof. Now I'm going to change the ceiling a bit later, or at least show an alternative you could do. But this is one way to go. It just puts a circular thing around and puts a lantern on top, which is fine. I think it looks alright. And then we can put in some pots and mushrooms, because, you know, mushroom aesthetic, and some trapdoors. This one leads to, you guessed it, an enchanting setup. I'll move it later, don't worry. But that's it for the mushroom house. I did change up the roof a bit, and now we have an enchanter in here. Now for the jungle house, or more like huts. I don't know how to describe this, but basically we're starting by planting some trees. If you were doing this in survival, you wouldn't need to plant these, but I just cleared out an area so that you can actually see what I'm doing. I'm planting an oak tree, and I placed 4 blocks by that side so that it always makes a tall tree, because I'm going to be using this for the base. Now, I don't end up keeping this tall tree. I do change it out because it isn't able to fit an enchanting table in it. So for this one, we're going to be adding in a ladder so that we can actually get up to this base, but this is just the place where I'm going to be putting the enchanting table. In the other starter houses, we had a pretty easy time with it, like all of them we could just bury it underground, but not so with the jungle. And what makes it even harder is that jungle trees are 2x2, so if you're making small platforms like we're about to do, centered around the jungle tree, then yeah, you can't really fit an enchanting table on there. I'll also put in some leaves to kind of cover it up a bit and integrate it with the leafy environment. And I'll even replace some of the books with chisel bookshelves, which I think look really cool. So now we'll connect the soon-to-be 2 sections up with a bridge. These bridges are somewhat difficult to make just because you have to get the curvature right, or else it just looks weird all around. I'll definitely be fiddling around with this a lot. Now, circles of this scale aren't too terribly difficult to freehand, but if you are going at a bigger scale, you can look up some kind of circle guide, although I do know that 2-block center circles are a bit harder to find online. Here I connect up the bridge, but as you'll see with a lot of this, it's going to be just fiddling around with the bridge until it looks good. And this time in particular, I'm going to be fiddling around for quite some time because this was a very difficult bridge to get right. So now let's add some fences and then we'll move on to the roof. Now, one thing that I like about the jungle biome is that you can actually do 3 wood types here. Oak from the little shrubs around the place, the jungle trees, which I don't remember how you get those, but I'm pretty sure they're in the biome. And we also have the bamboo, which you can find scattered around. Even if it's not a bamboo jungle, you can still find the odd block here and there. And I do believe you can fish it up here as well. We just have a curved dome roof. And then I'll move on to adding the survival blocks, such as the crafting table, stonecutter, furnaces you can see here. On the next side, I have a bed. I go with red. You can't really see it, but I think it does go nicely with the jungle biome and some nostalgia. Remember when red beds were the only type of beds around? I don't know if my audience is actually old enough to remember that, but I am. And then we'll have another platform. Of course, this does mean that we're going to need to connect another bridge to it, so that's going to take quite some time, as you'll see. And this one will eventually be used for storage, since there isn't a ton of space on these tiny platforms. This is the easiest of the 5 bases to expand, so if you want to make it bigger, then you can just add more platforms. And the more of these you add, the fuller the biome will look, and that could be pretty cool once you get quite a few of them. I do realize that 3 double chests might not be enough for you, but again, this is very expandable. You can easily add more if you want to. And you could even like replace the fences with barrels or something like that if you wanted to. And now we can move on to adding some lanterns on the bottom. Now, the vines are pretty long, so it's a little harder to see just because I turned up the random tick speed for the video so that I could make the leaves decay fast. This looks nice at daytime, but I think that it really shines at night. So definitely be my favorite one to build on a bigger scale because it's just so easy to scale and it looks so cool. Anyways, guys, that's going to do it for this video. I hope you've enjoyed. I would love to hear your thoughts about other starter base ideas, and I will see you in the next episode.